In April 1961, a small army of Cuban exiles, trained by the Central Intelligence Agency, backed by organized crime, and fueled by far-right extremists centered in places like Louisiana, set out on a daring, ill-fated mission. They believed it was their sacred duty to reclaim their homeland, to take back what had been wrested from them. What these men were promised for their sacrifices remains a mystery. Some speculated they were assured that, if they held Castro's forces at bay long enough, American intervention would follow. But the CIA, confident in their calculations, assured the incoming Kennedy administration that the Cuban exile forces had the manpower, ammunition, and sheer willpower to handle it alone. What followed was 3 brutal days and nights of fighting, leaving 115 dead and the rest captured. The promise of American intervention? Never realized. In previous documentaries, I've detailed the aftermath, hostile negotiations between the Kennedy administration and Castro to secure the release of the surviving exiles and American operatives. These men, betrayed not only by organized crime but by the very agency that trained them, became pawns in a deadly chess game. This debacle rippled across America's underworld. Meyer Lansky, Russell Bufalino, and their peers were now at odds, not only with Castro, but with the Kennedy administration itself. Around the same time, Robert F. Kennedy was sworn in as Attorney General of the United States. It was a position he wielded like a weapon, reshaping the role for generations to come. In his short term, Kennedy declared war on organized crime, challenging, and in some cases dismantling, the most powerful criminal empires in America. But Robert Kennedy wasn't just after the Mafia. He started digging into the Bay of Pigs invasion and, more importantly, the sinister connections between organized crime and the CIA. Men like Carlos Marcello and Santo Trafficante suddenly found themselves under the Attorney General's magnifying glass. What Kennedy uncovered was horrifying. These crime lords, long considered untouchable, had been tied to the CIA since the Second World War, going back to collaborations with Charlie Luciano during Thomas Dewey's time. Operations that once ran drugs and arms during wartime had evolved into empires of corruption. Meyer Lansky and Jimmy Blue Eyes Arlo watched the Kennedy administration with contempt. They had advised against the Kennedy brothers, warning powerful allies to steer clear. But their advice was ignored. Surprisingly, others within the Mafia, like Bufalino and Trafficante, threw their weight behind Kennedy. Their grudges against Richard Nixon ran deep, blaming him for the disaster that was Castro's rise to power. Nixon had supported Castro during his early days, providing arms through CIA and mob channels. When that alliance collapsed, so did the Mafia's trust. They turned to the Kennedys, naively hoping their new allies would take down Castro. What they didn't realize was they'd signed their own death warrants. In return for their misguided support, they faced relentless federal investigations, deportation threats, and even illegal abductions. For some, there was no escape. Abroad, the CIA and the Kennedy administration played their own violent games. In 1961, the Dominican Republic's leader was assassinated on CIA orders, a grim reminder that even political protection had its limits. By 1962, Meyer Lansky, ever the survivor, saw the writing on the wall. The game was shifting, and the stakes were deadlier than ever. He made a bold move, traveling to Israel, a chapter of his story we will pick up from. In August 1962, just a month after his 60th birthday, Meyer Lansky visited Israel for the first time. It wasn't merely a stop on a European tour to recuperate from a debilitating heart attack earlier that year. It marked a profound turning point in his life. For 2 weeks, Lansky immersed himself in the land and culture, and something within him shifted. He was never Jewish-minded when we were growing up, his son Buddy recalled. Christmas trees, bacon, no bar mitzvah. We didn't even know what Jewish was. But that trip unearthed a deeper connection to his heritage. Suddenly, Lansky was engrossed in Israeli politics, railing against Arab opposition and criticizing US policies that seemed unfavorable to Israel. He even began sharing memories of his childhood in Grodno and his grandfather, Benjamin, stories Buddy had never heard before. Lansky's connection to Israel wasn't entirely new. In the late 1940s, he had quietly supported the Havana, smuggling supplies through Florida and the New Jersey waterfront. Years earlier, during the rise of Nazism, he organized his street enforcers to disrupt German-American Bund rallies. But by the early 1960s, his interest in Jewish heritage grew more personal. Perhaps it was the shadow of mortality. On July 4, 1962, Lansky turned 60 in poor health, his body weakening. Once celebrated as a mastermind of high-stakes casinos and global syndicates, age and the collapse of his Cuban ventures underscored his vulnerability. While he could recover his lost fortune, restoring his vitality was another matter. In this period of introspection, Lansky found solace in Jewish traditions. Encouraged by his friend Joe Lindsay, Lansky began donating to a sports center at Brandeis University, established to support Jewish students excluded from Ivy League institutions. He also became a regular at his Hollywood synagogue, making donations despite his frailty. When a fundraiser suggested sending someone on his behalf, Lansky refused. "I like to feel part of the community," he said. This bond deepened during the Six-Day War in 1967. When Israeli forces captured Jerusalem, Lansky pledged support. Though his contributions, under $1,500, were modest, his passion was evident. He urged friends to give more and discussed Israel's future with Rabbi David Shapiro, who described Lansky as quiet, intelligent, and thoughtful. For Lansky, Israel became more than a cause. It was an emotional refuge. In its struggles, he found a purpose beyond wealth and power, a rare sense of renewal as he approached the twilight of his life. Most men find joy in cheering for sports teams or reveling in their children's successes. Meyer Lansky wasn't like most men. Sports bored him, and his children's lives, filled with complications, provided little to celebrate. Buddy Lansky, Meyer's eldest, embodied this dynamic, living in the shadow of his father's legacy. Buddy met Annette at the Rascal House Diner in North Miami Beach, bypassing lines with a wobble in his step and a bold introduction. "Hi, I'm Buddy Lansky. I'm Meyer Lansky's son." Annette, a twice-divorced single mother, was both impressed by the name and amused by Buddy's charm. When he proposed shortly after, she saw it as a fair trade, companionship and stability for them both. But Meyer was wary. He insisted they wait 2 years before marrying, a test of patience Annette endured reluctantly. Even after the wait, Meyer remained skeptical, suggesting a prenuptial agreement. Annette's unwavering sincerity. "I'm not looking to divorce the guy. I'm looking to live with him," convinced Meyer to drop the matter. They married in 1957, but not without tension. Meyer's wedding gift, a modest $22,000 house, was rejected by Annette, who deemed it a cracker box. Annette's confidence clashed with Meyer's cold pragmatism. When she chose a more expensive house, Meyer refused. Their relationship soured. Annette described him as cold as ice, recalling his knack for dissecting the simplest statements, leaving her constantly on edge. Uncle Jake Lansky, by contrast, was warm and approachable, providing Buddy with a $100 weekly allowance to supplement his modest earnings from the Tuscany motel. Annette's sympathy extended to Buddy's mother, Anne, a once elegant woman now living in squalor, and she tolerated Teddy Lansky, whose frugality was both personal and strategic, ensuring the family left no paper trails. Life with Buddy was a labyrinth of financial instability. Shared accounts saw sums vanish, $50,000 one day, $20,000 the next. Buddy claimed he was following his father's orders, but Uncle Jake uncovered the truth. Buddy was gambling and passing bad checks. Years earlier, Meyer had persuaded him to cash out a life insurance policy to invest in the Tuscany motel. a decision that backfired. Buddy's gambling debts spiraled, forcing him to borrow from loan sharks and use the Tuscany as collateral. Meyer's fury was swift. "You've hung around these guys. You know what this is," he scolded. Buddy admitted he'd rather have faced prison than his father's anger. The fallout was severe. The IRS investigated the Tuscany's finances, uncovering gambling debts and financial manipulation. Overwhelmed by guilt, Buddy attempted suicide, leaving Annette a note. "I cannot stand my father's contempt." Annette saved him, but their marriage deteriorated. Meyer suggested they divorce, and Annette, true to her word, asked for no alimony. Meyer's cold parting gesture was $1,000 sent to Annette's mother. Sandra Lansky, Meyer's daughter, lived in stark contrast to Buddy. Her Manhattan life was one of opulence and indulgence, filled with luxury apartments, fur coats, and a fast crowd that included cosmetics magnate Charles Revson. Sandra's lifestyle frustrated her brother Paul, who disapproved of her neglectful parenting and extravagant habits. Sandra's social circle included her estranged husband, Marvin Rappaport, whose homosexuality was an open secret, and Ed Hartnett, a dashing West Point graduate who fit seamlessly into her glamorous world. For Annette, life in the Lansky family was a maze of manipulation and unspoken rules. Meyer's presence loomed large, an intimidating figure who demanded control and loyalty. His name carried weight, but for Annette, it was a burden she could no longer bear. Reflecting on her marriage, she saw Buddy as a man forever trapped in his father's shadow, unable to escape the cold, unyielding influence of Meyer Lansky. Ed Harton, a West Point graduate who became an FBI agent, became a shadowy figure in the saga of Meyer Lansky's family. His mysterious connection with Sandra Lansky, Meyer's daughter, electrified the FBI's pursuit of Lansky in the late 1950s. By then, Meyer was firmly in the Bureau's crosshairs, thanks to the Kefauver hearings, the Appalachian meeting, and his Cuban casino empire. Sandra, driven by resentment and fractured memories, became an unexpected ally. Though she wasn't coerced, she eagerly shared information, earning a code number with the FBI's Criminal Intelligence Squad in New York. Her insights, however, were often speculative, offering little actionable intelligence. Agents remained baffled by her motivations, linking them to her belief that Meyer had committed her mother to marry his second wife, Teddy. Sandra's childhood was riddled with deception, such as discovering Meyer had married Teddy days before their Christmas trip in 1948. This betrayal shaped her rebellious nature, leaving her disillusioned by the men in her life. As Sandra spiraled into drug abuse and erratic behavior in New York's nightlife, Meyer became deeply alarmed. He confided in his daughter-in-law Edna that the drugs are killing her. Yet he remained unaware that Sandra was feeding information to the FBI, a betrayal that paralleled the dysfunction in the Lansky family. Sandra's unraveling reached a breaking point when she gave birth to a premature, severely disabled baby boy, David J. Rappaport, whose father's identity she never revealed. Despite their estrangement, Meyer's ex-wife, Anne, cared for the baby, briefly uniting the fractured family. However, the challenges of David's condition proved overwhelming, and he was institutionalized, a tragedy Sandra could never escape. Meyer's fury over Sandra's reckless actions was uncharacteristically explosive. "I'm never going to visit her again," he vowed. Even her elder son, Gary, felt the weight of Meyer's disappointment. Sandra's betrayal left Meyer grappling with heartbreak. During a hospital stay for his ulcers, he confided in Edna, lamenting Sandra's choices. "Why couldn't she do something with her life?" he asked, his voice heavy with sorrow. "She had every opportunity. I'd give her anything." Pointing to a candy striper in the room, he added, "I'd be so glad if she did something like that." For a brief moment, the calculating mastermind of organized crime revealed his humanity. Meyer was a father burdened by love and disappointment, unable to reconcile the chaos within his own family. Paul Lansky's life was a stark contrast to the chaos that plagued his siblings Buddy and Sandra. While they seemed to stumble from one scandal to another, Paul carved out a life defined by discipline and self-reliance. The Army sent him to the University of Michigan, where he earned a master's degree in engineering, graduating with honors. His wife, Edna, was equally industrious, obtaining a real estate license and maintaining a steady income while raising their 2 children with the kind of poise rarely seen in a family haunted by turmoil. Paul was proud of his independence, though it often came with a sharp edge. "I don't ever want to be like my brother mooching off my old man," he once told his son. That pride sometimes bordered on defiance. When Meyer offered to buy him a car after graduation, Paul flatly refused with a curt, "No thank you, sir." Even Meyer's invitations to the Riviera Hotel in Havana during its 1957 heyday were rejected. He wanted nothing to do with it, Edna recalled. To Paul, Havana was a symbol of everything he despised about his father's world: the glitz, the casinos, and the shadowy dealings that propped them up. Paul's disdain for Meyer's lifestyle had deep roots. As a child, he was sent to military school, crying bitterly the first night and vowing never to shed another tear. That rejection of vulnerability hardened into a lifelong protest against his father's empire. Yet beneath the surface, there was loyalty and a measure of respect. When Paul's first son was born in 1957, he named him Meyer Lansky II, a decision that shocked the family. In Jewish tradition, children weren't named after the living, and even Meyer himself regretted the burden the name carried. "I told your father never to name you that," Meyer later admitted to his grandson. Paul's life wasn't without its own strains. Though he excelled academically and professionally, his personal life was marked by emotional distance. Edna noticed his increasing tendency to retreat into his study, where he spent hours alone, avoiding socializing and micromanaging household expenses. His thriftiness mirrored traits he despised in his stepmother, Teddy Lansky, whose loud and brash demeanor embarrassed even Meyer's friends. Yet, Paul seemed to inherit her frugality. He scolded Edna for buying Heinz ketchup over generic brands and suggested she wear a uniform to save on laundry. When Edna purchased a Cadillac with her real estate earnings, Paul's bitterness only deepened. Meyer, in contrast, showed flashes of generosity. On visits to Paul and Edna in Tacoma, Washington, he stayed in a penthouse suite at the Winthrop Hotel and treated the family to lavish dinners. To young Meyer II, his grandfather was larger than life, a figure of dignity and meticulous standards. Even bean soup had to be perfect. If it wasn't right, it went back. "Waiter, no onions," Meyer would insist. Yet, for all the warmth Meyer displayed with his grandchildren, his relationship with Paul remained stiff and formal. They never hugged or kissed, Edna noted. Conversations were limited to politics, leaving their bond feeling hollow. The family dynamic grew more strained when Buddy visited. Confined to a wheelchair, Buddy was a playful presence for the children, but Paul remained detached, retreating to his study. Edna believed the coldness between the brothers stemmed from childhood trauma and the fallout of their parents' divorce. Paul occasionally shared fragments of his pain, including a visit to his mother, Anne Lansky, where she initially failed to recognize him. Her erratic behavior, smoking, and obsessively flushing the toilet left Edna deeply unsettled. The cracks in Paul's marriage became undeniable when Edna discovered frequent cash withdrawals from their account. Paul's vague excuses unraveled when Edna uncovered his visits to a Japanese bathhouse. Devastated, she called Meyer for help. Meyer flew to Tacoma and confronted Paul at the Winthrop Hotel. Paul's confession left Meyer visibly shaken. "His mouth actually fell open," Edna recalled. Meyer's anger followed swiftly. "You shape up. You get in line with your family," he commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. Paul, standing at attention like a cadet, meekly replied, "Yes, sir." Despite Meyer's efforts to hold his family together, the fractures ran too deep. Buddy later reflected, "Every one of us hurt our father. Sandra, Paul, me, none of us were perfect." Annette Lansky believed Meyer genuinely tried to be a good father, but was limited by the same flaws that had shaped his own life. "He really tried," she said, "but none of us knew how a family ought to work." For Meyer, family meant rituals and discipline. Summers at the Jersey Shore, Christmas trips to Rockefeller Plaza. But these traditions couldn't bridge the emotional gaps. Paul's life in Tacoma, marked by secrecy and withdrawal, echoed his father's in ways he couldn't see. Like Meyer, who handled disputes by leaving the house, Paul locked himself away, creating a world where silence and solitude were his refuge. His children rarely saw him, and his wife bore the brunt of his detachment. Yet for all his distance, Paul couldn't fully escape the shadow of his father, a man who, for better or worse, defined the world around him. In May 1962, Meyer Lansky was in fragile recovery, having just been discharged from Trafalgar Hospital in New York following heart trouble. Seeking peace, he settled in room 8E of the modest Volney Hotel on East 74th Street. His wife, Teddy, stayed by his side, and a steady stream of friends and associates visited. But the seeming tranquility was an illusion. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover's directive, was listening to every word. By this time, Hoover had shifted his stance on organized crime, no longer dismissing it as a myth. The 1957 Appalachian meeting had shattered any doubts, revealing a vast network of criminal syndicates. Hoover declared Lansky one of the very most important individuals in the national crime picture, urging agents to use extraordinary investigative techniques. These included warrantless wiretaps, break-ins, and hidden microphones, methods previously reserved for Cold War espionage. New York hotels became unwitting hubs for FBI operations. Certain rooms were permanently wired for surveillance. Though the Volney Hotel lacked pre-installed equipment, the FBI swiftly transformed Lansky's room into a surveillance hotspot. For weeks, agents documented his life, but their findings revealed little of the criminal mastermind they expected. Instead, Lansky appeared as an aging man, absorbed in intellectual pursuits, reading books on history, grammar, and French quotations. His meals, matzos, sardines, jello, and Irish lamb stew, were equally mundane. Despite the Bureau's efforts, the picture they painted was far from damning. Lansky's sharp wit often emerged in his conversations, which the FBI eagerly recorded. He mused about morality, stating, "1/4 of us is good, 3/4 is bad. That's a tough fight. 3 against 1. In May 1962, he and Teddy discussed wiretapping, a topic tied to a proposed bill in Congress. Teddy saw it as acceptable against communists, but sickening otherwise. She even expressed reluctant respect for the Kennedys' crackdown on organized crime. Lansky, ever cynical, called his life on the unhypocritical side of the law. On May 27, 1962, Lansky uttered what would become one of his most famous and misquoted lines. While watching David Susskind's Open End, featuring a documentary on organized crime, a panelist remarked that organized crime was second in size only to the government itself. Lansky reportedly turned to Teddy and said, "Organized crime is bigger than U.S. Steel." FBI agents paraphrased this comment in their notes, which later evolved into the iconic quote, "We're bigger than U.S. Steel." By 1967, it was widely attributed to Lansky, immortalized in Life magazine and The Godfather Part 2. Though Lansky denied ever saying it, the line cemented his legendary status. Privately, Lansky was a voracious reader of history and biographies, shunning fiction as a waste of time. "History is the truth," he told his son Buddy. Yet he understood how easily facts could be distorted. This was evident in his connection to the Flamingo Hotel Casino. Lansky's name never appeared on official records, but his early investments ensured he quietly reaped profits. After Ben Siegel's death, the Flamingo thrived, and Lansky continued to receive a share of the skim in cash. By 1960, new owners acquired the casino, but Lansky, true to form, orchestrated the deal from the shadows. For Meyer Lansky, history was a delicate balance of truth and myth. Though he despised fiction, he recognized its power to shape perceptions. As headlines, rumors, and exaggerations swirled, the legend of Meyer Lansky grew, larger than life, yet rooted in the shadows he so carefully navigated. By 1960, Albert Parvin sought to offload the Flamingo Hotel Casino, turning to Meyer Lansky to broker a deal. Lansky arranged its sale to Miami hoteliers Morris Landsberg and his associates, earning a 2% finder's fee, $200,000, paid discreetly. This deal came at a crucial time for Lansky, who had lost significant income after Castro seized his Havana Riviera hotel. The Flamingo fee, structured as 32 quarterly payments over 8 years, helped fill the financial void, and Lansky even declared a portion on his 1961 tax return to maintain a facade of legitimacy. The IRS had scrutinized Lansky's finances since the 1951 Kefauver hearings. In 1953, they claimed he owed nearly $250,000 in unpaid taxes. Lansky, with the help of his lawyer Moses Polikoff, managed to settle for just $9,000 in 1956. From then on, Lansky meticulously filed his taxes, giving the IRS little to work with. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Lansky lived modestly. He and his wife Teddy drove leased Chevrolets and resided in a $49,000 bungalow on Hibiscus Drive in Hallandale, Florida. The house, purchased in 1959, provided seclusion and stability after the collapse of his Cuban empire. Teddy decorated the home with frugality, preferring sales over luxury, while Lansky adjusted to a quieter life. To the FBI, tasked with surveilling him, the house was both a challenge and an advantage. It was difficult to monitor discreetly, but offered only one road in and out. Despite Lansky's outwardly mundane existence, the FBI labeled him a priority investigation. Under Hoover's directive, agents broke into the Hibiscus Drive home while Lansky and Teddy were away, scouting locations for hidden microphones. By June 1962, they successfully planted bugs in his study and later in another area of the house. Yet their surveillance captured little of criminal significance. Instead, they documented Lansky's daily life, arguments with Teddy, fishing off his porch, doting on grandchildren, and dining at local spots like the Tuscany or the Diplomat Hotel. Lansky's days followed a predictable rhythm, often spent with his brother Jake or friends like Jimmy Allo. Afternoons were dedicated to Gulfstream Park for horse races or Hollywood Kennel Club for dog betting. One frequent companion was Benjamin Siegelbaum, a flamboyant businessman with ties to Lansky since the 1940s. As Lansky's health improved, he resumed light exercise, including golf at the Hollywood Country Club, where he worked on his swing with quiet determination. For Hoover's FBI, Lansky's life in Florida was a frustrating enigma. Years of surveillance failed to uncover evidence of his role as a criminal mastermind. Lansky's ability to maintain an image of ordinary retirement while evading incriminating proof only added to his mystique. For all their efforts, the FBI was left chasing the shadow of a man whose true dealings remained tantalizingly out of reach. Teddy Lansky was never one to stay silent, especially regarding the FBI's relentless harassment. Agents parked on their street, tailed their car, and knocked on their door uninvited. Teddy, fiery and outspoken, confronted them head-on. "It's a shame," she snapped at one agent. "My husband has a clean record and nothing to hide." FBI reports described her outbursts as tirades, while Meyer remained calm, even cooperative, during questioning. He humorously acknowledged the FBI's omnipresence, telling his ulcer specialist, Dr. Seymour Gray, "Doc, they know everything." Meyer's old friend Vincent "Jimmy Blue Eyes" Arlo lived nearby in Hollywood, Florida, on a more lavish waterfront estate. A former armed robber who served time in Sing Sing, Arlo was sharp and well-read, described as monk-like in his later years. Arlo and Meyer had been partners since the 1930s, investing together in ventures like the Flamingo in Las Vegas and the Riviera in Havana. While Arlo was labeled a capo regime in the Genovese family, Meyer, due to his Jewish heritage, was classified as an LCN associate. The FBI's rigid organizational charts failed to capture their entrepreneurial reality. Men like Lansky and Alo thrived on fluid, shadowy alliances. In Las Vegas, Arlo managed New York's casino interests, including the Sands Hotel, where Jack Entratter was the frontman. Entratter, eager to impress, once showed Arlo his extravagant $1 million luxury suite. But Arlo, unimpressed, exploded. "I should have left you a headwaiter, puffing your cigars, strutting in your suits. You're nothing but lackeys." Despite Entratter's 12% stake, only 2 points were his. The rest belonged to hidden partners, like Arlo, many with criminal records that kept their names off official documents. Skimming, the silent removal of cash before it hit the books, was their lifeblood. By the 1960s, Las Vegas skimming operated with military precision. Casinos like the Sands, Flamingo, and Fremont funneled cash to points holders. Couriers like Ben Siegelbaum and Ida Devine shuttled money across the country. Siegelbaum by plane with a briefcase full of cash, and Devine by train, earning her the nickname the Lady in Mink. His partnership with Arlo, however, was crucial. Arlo's calm enforcement complemented Lansky's precision, making them a formidable duo. In one memorable FBI-recorded incident, Siegelbaum stormed into the Fremont Hotel, demanding an exact breakdown of the skim for Lansky. The operation was meticulous, with cash recounted to meet Lansky's exacting standards. Even under heavy surveillance, Lansky thrived, orchestrating an empire of shadows and skims. While Alo enforced the rules, it was Meyer's mind that turned chaos into order. Together, they epitomized the silent power behind the Las Vegas economy. A partnership that left agents baffled and their true dealings shrouded in mystery. Meyer Lansky's influence over Las Vegas was profound, even as he presented himself as a quiet retiree near Miami. FBI investigations revealed he controlled at least 42 casino points, each earning about $2,000 monthly, over $1 million annually. Lansky set the price of a single point at $52,500, handling investments worth over $2 million. However, questions lingered. Did Lansky own all 42 points, or was he managing shares for others? The FBI's surveillance at the Fremont Hotel brought unexpected drama in April 1963 when agents overheard Eddie Levinson reading a Justice Department memo detailing the skimming operation. Levinson's shock, "They know about Ida," mirrored the agents, as the memo revealed FBI knowledge of the Lady in Mink, Ida Devine. 4 days later, the bug went silent, and Levinson retaliated by suing the FBI for illegal entry and privacy violations. Represented by Edward Bennett Williams, Levinson struck a deal in 1968. He pled no contest to minor charges in exchange for dropping his lawsuit. This case led to stricter wiretapping regulations under 1968's Title III rules, but the source of the leaked memo was never identified. For Lansky, the discovery of the bug shielded him and his associates from prosecution. The illegally obtained evidence was inadmissible, ending the case against Lansky, Ben Siegelbaum, and others. This failure only bolstered Lansky's reputation as untouchable, though it stemmed more from government missteps than his own genius. By 1963, Lansky and Jimmy Blue Eyes Allo recognized the risks of staying in Las Vegas. Increasing law enforcement pressure and advanced surveillance technology signaled it was time to step back. "We're getting too old," Allo remarked, echoing their acceptance of change. By 1967, the Sands Hotel and other properties were sold to figures like Howard Hughes, marking the rise of corporate Las Vegas. Gambling empires once dominated by gangsters gave way to conglomerates and publicly traded companies. The sale of the Sands provided Lansky with a lucrative exit. He reportedly collected over $1 million, tax-free, from his share of the points. As Las Vegas transformed into a corporate playground, properties skyrocketed in value, with casinos selling for hundreds of millions of dollars. The legitimate world proved more profitable than the underground rackets Lansky and Allo had built. Lansky and Allo's legacy endured in Las Vegas's neon lights. They had bridged the gap between illegal gambling and the corporate world, but stepped aside as the era of shadowy dominance gave way to a new age. By 1967, they retreated to quieter lives, leaving the Strip's future in the hands of corporate America. When Dick Jaffe joined the Miami IRS office, he couldn't have imagined how quickly his career would plunge into the murky world of offshore money laundering. One of his first assignments involved the $50 gaming tax stamp, a poorly conceived law demanding bookmakers purchase a federal stamp acknowledging their illegal activity. Predictably, the law failed, but Jaffe wasn't concerned with its flaws. He was following the money. As he investigated Miami's bookmaking and loan sharking rackets, Jaffe uncovered a startling pattern. Profits were vanishing offshore. Time and again, the trail led to the Bahamas, a quick 40-minute flight from Miami, and long a refuge for the wealthy and unscrupulous. By December 1962, Jaffe decided to follow the cash. In Nassau, his first day combing through company files yielded a bombshell. The stockholders of the newly chartered Bank of World Commerce were a rogues gallery of organized crime figures, including Irving Niggy Devine and Eddie Levinson, a Las Vegas casino frontman. Jaffe had stumbled onto a financial underworld linking U.S. gambling hubs to the unregulated Bahamas. The revelations forced U.S. authorities to confront organized crime's global financial network for the first time. Jaffe's investigation revealed that couriers from Las Vegas bypassed customs entirely, depositing cash at Miami's Bank of Perrine. Thanks to an arrangement with Nassau's Castle Bank, these funds seamlessly transferred to offshore accounts without a trace. Figures like Mo Dalitz and Morris Kleinman of the Cleveland Syndicate had accounts at Castle Bank, using it to move untaxed money safely beyond the IRS's reach. The Bahamas weren't just a tax haven, they had become a critical hub in organized crime's financial empire. Jaffe's findings unraveled a web where dirty money was moved offshore. Though proof of its return to the US, clean and laundered, remained elusive. This discovery marked a turning point in law enforcement's understanding of mob finances. The spotlight soon turned to Meyer Lansky, the mob's financial genius. While rumors swirled that Lansky had pioneered sophisticated money laundering, investigators could only confirm he had hidden funds abroad, primarily in Swiss banks. His tax returns revealed nothing beyond legitimate oil and gas investments, hotel revenues, and dividends. If Lansky had mastered laundering, the government lacked the evidence to prove it. Lansky's introduction to offshore banking came through John Pullman, a charismatic schemer whose career spanned bootlegging, stock manipulation, and cross-border finance. Pullman established the Bank of World Commerce in Nassau in 1961, attracting a who's who of mob financiers, including Mo Dalitz and Jimmy Blue Eyes. Offshore banking exploded in popularity, driven by tightening tax laws and the rise of global travel. Pullman's operations were closely tied to Tibor Rosenbaum, a Swiss banker with an extraordinary past. Once a rabbi and arms smuggler for Israel, Rosenbaum had built a financial empire tied to Israeli interests. By 1965, his international credit bank became a sanctuary for Lansky's offshore funds. Though Lansky trusted Rosenbaum implicitly, the banker's ventures were risky. Half the bank's $60 million deposits were sunk into an ambitious Italian resort project on land once owned by royalty, a testament to Rosenbaum's audacity. Lansky's offshore dealings revealed a world of ambition, risk, and innovation. Men like Pullman and Rosenbaum were gamblers in their own right, bending rules to transform dirty money into untouchable wealth. For Lansky, this shadowy universe offered both opportunity and peril, a high-stakes game where precision and control were paramount. Tibor Rosenbaum's grand ambitions unraveled spectacularly. Banking on political connections, he gambled on turning a swath of Italian land into a luxury resort. However, the Rome City Council blindsided him, declaring the area a national park, killing his plans. To finance the project, Rosenbaum relied on cut-rate Liberian government bonds obtained through Liberian President William Tubman, recording them at inflated values to mask his bank's precarious state. By 1974, the cracks were undeniable. Depositors demanded their money, forcing Rosenbaum to admit the truth: he couldn't pay. His international credit bank closed for the high holy days and never reopened. In October, bankruptcy was declared, wiping out funds, including Meyer Lansky's. Despite Rosenbaum's efforts to repay depositors, the debacle proved Lansky wasn't immune to the chaos of international finance. Amid this turmoil, Lansky found refuge in Michigan. In 1964, he made a modest investment in an oil well with Sam Garfield, a childhood friend of Mo Dalitz. Garfield, a legitimate oilman in Clare, Michigan, invited Lansky to invest in the State Summerfield, a concession. Lansky's $250,000 investment eventually yielded steady annual returns of $25,000 to $30,000, especially as oil prices surged during the 1970s embargo. The investment allowed Lansky to maintain the image of a modest businessman while offering a quiet escape from the FBI's relentless surveillance in Miami. It took years for agents to discover Lansky's frequent Michigan visits for business with Garfield. Back in Miami, Lansky remained a headline fixture. In December 1965, the Miami Herald launched an exposé by investigative journalist Hank Messick, painting Lansky as the boss of the Eastern Syndicate and the mastermind of organized crime. Messick claimed Lansky's fortune was $300 million, a figure later revealed as exaggerated. Even IRS investigator Dick Jaffe and the FBI dismissed the number, noting Lansky's actual income, largely from the Fremont casino skim, was around $1 million annually. The $300 million myth persisted, bolstered by media depictions of Lansky as an omnipotent mobster controlling vast criminal empires. Lansky's real assets told a humbler story. His stake in Havana's Riviera casino was wiped out by Castro's revolution. His share from selling the Sands Hotel in the late 1960s amounted to about $1 million. His Michigan oil investments, still growing in 1965, were valued under $100,000. His modest house in Hallandale, Florida, was worth $50,000, with 15 years left on the mortgage. Altogether, Lansky's net worth likely didn't exceed $3 million, a far cry from the mythical figure Messick popularized. Yet the myth endured, blending fantasy with reality. The 1960s media frenzy amplified Lansky's reputation. This was the era of James Bond villains, intellectual masterminds commanding shadowy empires. Lansky's unassuming demeanor and intellect fit the mold, casting him as a real-life Blofeld. His Jewish heritage added depth to his mystique, evoking comparisons to Arnold Rothstein, the enigmatic financier of organized crime. Stories of Lansky controlling every Las Vegas casino and masterminding the mob's finances thrived on imagination, not evidence. The FBI's files reflected this confusion, mixing verified facts with unverified claims. Sometimes Lansky leaned into the myth. After a grand jury appearance, he quipped, "I don't want to spoil the drama of your stories, so I don't think I'll say anything." He even joked with Messick, suggesting, "I think you ought to pay me half the money you've made writing about me." Lansky's son, Buddy, admitted, "They always made him out like the financial wizard." And I really think he believed it. Rabbi Shapiro, a confidant, observed, "I think Meyer rather liked the cleverness and power they gave him." Despite the legends, Lansky's life was far from glamorous. His investments in Michigan were modest but steady. His entanglement with Rosenbaum's ill-fated bank highlighted his vulnerability to financial chaos. The media painted him as an omnipotent figure, yet his wealth and power were exaggerated to almost comical proportions. Lansky balanced his criminal enterprises with the need to appear as a quiet retiree. By 1966, Meyer Lansky had an unlikely new companion, a Shih Tzu named Bruiser. Lansky was never fond of dogs. His wife Anne's bulldog and fox terrier in the 1930s had been met with disdain. But when his second wife, Teddy, brought home a Shih Tzu named Tiger, Lansky surprised everyone by warming to it. After Tiger died, Lansky consoled Teddy by gifting her Bruiser, a dog he eventually grew fond of himself. Walking Bruiser became a daily ritual for Lansky, and a reliable schedule for FBI agents who used his predictable strolls along Hibiscus Drive to monitor his movements. Surveillance extended beyond Miami. In 1967, the Miami Herald dubbed him the most publicized organized crime figure in the world, a title that brought both notoriety and scrutiny. The mythology of Meyer Lansky outlived the man, fueled by the media's obsession with larger-than-life villains. His life was a mixture of fact and fiction, a man whose myth overshadowed his reality. And again in 1967, reporters found Lansky staying at a modest Howard Johnson's motel near Detroit during one of his Michigan trips. Relaxed and amiable, Lansky denied any connections to rumored casino operations in the Bahamas and London, though his ties were undeniable. The Colony Club in London, founded by Dino Cellini and staffed by veterans of Havana's Riviera, bore Lansky's fingerprints. He had visited in 1965 and offered advice, but his stake was minor, 5 or 6 points at most. The Lucayan Beach Casino in the Bahamas was another story. Lansky's close friendship with Lou Chesler, who managed the casino's skimming operations, suggested deeper involvement. Though Lansky wanted a declared role, his criminal reputation barred him from official participation, forcing him to profit indirectly, likely through junkets arranged by associates like Dusty Peters. Lansky's influence in the Bahamas fueled conspiracies. Some journalists speculated he orchestrated the 1943 murder of Sir Harry Oakes, who opposed gambling expansion. By 1967, even the British Royal Commission investigating Bahamian casinos remarked. At one stage, we began to wonder whether the name of Meyer Lansky was not some vast journalistic piece of fiction. Despite limited evidence, Lansky's name became synonymous with organized crime, and phrases like Lansky Group or Lansky Associates were invented to sustain the myth. By the late 1960s, Lansky's legend was solidified. The U.S. Justice Department under Henry Peterson dubbed him the #1 mob figure in the country. When Dugald Macmillan took charge of the newly formed Miami Strike Force in 1968, Lansky became its primary target. Macmillan later called Lansky a murderous, villainous bastard who had refined his act but remained a criminal. Yet Lansky seemed unbothered, responding to scrutiny with humor. "I don't want to spoil the drama of your stories," he told reporters. To Hank Messick, who exaggerated Lansky's fortune as $300 million, Lansky quipped, "I think you ought to pay me half the money you've made writing about me." Despite his myth, Lansky's reality was humbler. By 1969, pressure from law enforcement mounted. The IRS raided operations tied to Las Vegas junkets Lansky had helped organize, and federal agents monitored his every move. On May 6, 1969, Lansky told FBI agent Jerris Armstrong he had warned the U.S. government about Castro, claiming they dismissed his warnings as self-interest over losing Havana's casinos. However, the rapport soured later that year when Armstrong served Lansky a subpoena in a Miami steam room. Frustrated, Lansky confronted Armstrong days later, leaning into his car window and hissing, "Jerry, get off my back. A word to the wise is sufficient." His parting remark was cryptic. "Jerry, you should read Kipling's poem, If." By 1970, Lansky's troubles deepened. After returning from a holiday in Acapulco, where FBI agents shadowed him, Lansky was searched by customs. They found Donatal tablets for his ulcers, but he lacked a prescription, triggering further scrutiny. Meanwhile, the Justice Department's strike force intensified its coordination of federal and local agencies to dismantle Lansky's operations. Dugald Macmillan dismissed the mythology surrounding Lansky, viewing him as a calculating crook rather than a mastermind. Yet the media and even Lansky's criminal peers perpetuated the myth. Surveillance tapes often captured mobsters referring to Lansky in awe, though much of it was recycled rumor. Lansky's mystique thrived on this intersection of fact and fiction. He maintained calm under scrutiny, but his outbursts in 1969 revealed the cracks. Decades of careful planning and quiet power collided with relentless legal pressure, threatening the man once dubbed chairman of the board. Lansky's myth lived on in headlines and lore, but behind the legend was a man balancing notoriety and vulnerability, fighting to preserve his legacy. In March 1970, the discovery of a vial of pills at Miami Airport ignited a media frenzy. Though the tablets had been sold to Meyer Lansky without a prescription by a familiar pharmacist, headlines sensationalized the event. "Lansky is jailed on drug counts," declared the Miami Herald. The press painted the arrest as a long-awaited reckoning for the chairman of the board. Surrounded by reporters, Lansky was fingerprinted and charged with possession of barbiturates and unlabeled drugs, facing potential prison time and fines. Dugald Macmillan, Miami strike force chief, showed no sympathy, later boasting, "I held his feet to the fire." Lansky's defense, however, proved airtight. His attorney, Joseph Varon, argued that Florida lacked jurisdiction over the U.S. customs area where the pills were found. On June 19, 1970, Judge Carling Stedman dismissed the charges. Varon noted pointedly, "If the defendant were John Smith instead of Meyer Lansky, there would never have been a prosecution." For Lansky, the case symbolized mounting harassment rather than victory. The pressure continued to build. Weeks earlier, Morris Landsberg had been subpoenaed in a Flamingo Hotel skimming investigation, and sensational articles in Reader's Digest and Atlantic Monthly labeled Lansky as the mastermind of organized crime. Once amused by such exaggerations, Lansky now felt the weight of relentless scrutiny. For a man reputed to be the mastermind behind organized crime in the United States, Meyer Lansky led a surprisingly modest life. He resided in a comfortable apartment in Seasons South, located at 5001 Collins Avenue in Miami Beach. Still trim and sharp-eyed in his later years, Lansky dressed in understated elegance. His apartment reflected his unassuming demeanor, furnished in modern style with a palette dominated by shades of blue. American landscapes adorned the walls, and shelves displayed delicate glassware. Lansky's favorite spot was the kitchen, where he relished entertaining guests. There was nothing in his surroundings that hinted at the immense wealth and power often attributed to him. Every evening Lansky would stroll along Collins Avenue, accompanied by his aging Tibetan Shih Tzu. To the casual observer, he seemed like any other retired businessman, seeking serenity and sunshine in the twilight of his life. Neighbors had no reason to complain. There were no loud noises, gunshots, or suspicious visitors to disturb the peace. One evening, the authors asked Lansky, "You're so comfortable here. Why did you suddenly decide to fly off to Israel in 1970? Lansky leaned back. His expression was one of weary frustration.
My life was becoming totally impossible. In the few years before I decided to go to Israel, I had FBI agents following me night and day. They had their cars parked around my home. My telephone was bugged. If I wanted to call a friend, I had to do it from a phone booth. Sometimes I would turn around and talk to the men who were following me. Usually they were embarrassed, but occasionally they would tell me frankly that they were acting on orders and that, somehow or other, they were going to pin me down for something.
He paused, his voice tinged with a mix of defiance and disbelief.
Books and articles accuse me of every crime under the sun. Committees like the Kefauver Committee and people like Robert Kennedy, when he was Attorney General, pointed the finger at me. Yet why is it that with the great power of the United States behind them, they were never able or willing to put me up in a court and accuse me with the proof that I was a so-called master criminal? Books and articles accuse me of every crime under the sun. Committees like the Kefauver Committee and people like Robert Kennedy, when he was Attorney General, pointed the finger at me. Yet why is it that with the great power of the United States behind them, they were never able or willing to put me up in a court and accuse me with the proof that I was a so-called master criminal? In February of 1970, I decided to take a vacation in Acapulco, in Mexico. I had a heart problem and ulcers besides. I needed the rest badly. My old friend Moses Polikoff came along, and some friends, businessmen, came down from Canada. The minute I got to Mexico, a trip I had not tried to hide in any way, there were headlines back in Miami saying that there was a convention of the heads of organized crime in Acapulco. Now, if I were really the head gangster of all the criminals in the United States, would I go so openly and without trying to put on a beard or disguise myself somehow? And would a respected man of the law, like Moses Polikoff, participate in such a gathering? But to my amazement, I read in the papers that this was Operation Underworld.
The paranoia surrounding Lansky's presence in Acapulco escalated quickly. Lansky checked into room 993 at the Acapulco Hilton, with Polikoff in the adjoining room. He attended meetings at the home of his friend Leo Berkovich, a Canadian businessman who had relocated to Acapulco years earlier. Despite Lansky's insistence that he was on vacation, authorities from both the United States and Canada dispatched agents to surveil the group. From February 15th to 28th, a close watch was kept, but nothing substantial emerged. Lansky shook his head, a bitter smile crossing his lips.
The next thing I knew, 3 policemen came to my room at the Hilton. They knocked at the door, and when I asked them in, they said they'd come to interrogate me about a report that I was involved in a robbery of valuable paintings from a museum in Mexico City. I was a bit surprised and said I wasn't in the business of art theft. Nevertheless, they searched my room thoroughly, took my suitcases apart, and for some reason took a lot of photographs.
The investigation yielded little beyond a tangential connection to a man named Frank Pasquale, a suspect on the international narcotics list. Lansky explained,
They were determined to get me somehow. On March 5th, when I flew back to the United States, a squad of high-powered customs officials stopped me at Miami International Airport and said they were going to search me. I didn't protest. This was their right, and I didn't have anything to hide. Suddenly, one of the men shouted, "Hey, I've got it." He was holding up a bottle of pills he'd found in my shaving kit. I told him he could save himself a lot of trouble because the pills were Donatal, which my doctor had prescribed for my ulcers. They apologized and gave me back my pills, and I went home.
3 weeks later, Lansky's ordeal escalated.
While I was at home talking to my wife, there was a knock at the door. Like in some bad movie, somebody yelled, "Open in the name of the law." I opened the door, and they handcuffed me and took me to the police station, where they accused me of illegal transfer of drugs. I asked them what drugs. They said those tablets the customs authorities had found on me. I said again that they were Donatol tablets for my ulcers, and my lawyer got me out on bail.
His frustration was palpable as he continued.
The next day, the newspaper headline said, "Lansky charged with traffic in drugs." When the case came to trial, my doctor sent a letter saying he had prescribed the tablets for me, and I was acquitted. But there were no headlines about that, just a little 4-line item buried on an inside page.
Meyer Lansky's early encounters with the law painted a vivid picture of a man who always seemed to slip through the cracks. His brushes with the legal system began on November 15, 1918, when, at just 16, he was arrested for causing a disturbance in his Manhattan neighborhood. A neighbor, Sarah Ginsburg, filed the complaint, and Lansky walked away with a $2 fine. Just 10 days later, another neighbor, Lena Friedman, accused him of a felony. The charge was dismissed, but the pattern had been set: small-time trouble that hinted at bigger things to come. Years later, investigators tried to piece together Lansky's early run-ins with the law, interviewing officers and combing through records. It was a frustrating exercise, emblematic of how Lansky's life became an elusive puzzle for law enforcement. Even Officer Weiss and Officer Hughes, responsible for some of his early arrests, became ghosts in the bureaucratic machine. According to Lansky's longtime associate, Doc Stacher, these early arrests often had more colorful and darker stories behind them. Stacher claimed that one arrest involved Lansky, a 21-year-old Charlie Luciano, and a 14-year-old Bugsy Siegel. The trio was caught in the apartment of a woman who'd been beaten, her screams drawing the attention of the police. In court, the boys spun a tale about Lansky trying to break up a fight, but Staker later admitted the real story. The woman had been blackmailing them over their connection to a missing Irish cop's son. The woman reappeared years later, crossing paths with Siegel in a bar. The encounter ended with Siegel's arrest for assault, though Lansky managed to persuade her not to testify. Lansky's troubles didn't stop there. In 1920 he was fined again after a street fight reportedly tied to a turf war with Joe Masseria's men. 2 years later, his name surfaced in a violent underworld feud involving the shooting of Daniel Francis Ahern. Lansky vehemently denied involvement, but tensions flared when Ahern's ally, Pete Bender, threatened retaliation. Weeks later, Bender vanished, and Lansky faced homicide charges. With no body and no witnesses willing to talk, the case evaporated. Lansky's ability to walk away unscathed wasn't lost on law enforcement. In 1932, while in Chicago with Luciano to mediate a gangland dispute, Lansky was detained for 2 days. The police released him without charges, adding another near miss to his growing legend. After World War II, the scrutiny intensified. Lansky's gambling activities drew indictments, and investigators began dissecting every corner of his past. Yet no matter how hard they tried, Lansky remained untouchable, poised and calculating, always one step ahead. For law enforcement, Lansky's life was a riddle. For Lansky, it was business as usual. The only time Meyer Lansky ever went to prison was in 1952, and even then, it was for something as mundane as a gambling charge. It happened after the Kefauver Committee shone a spotlight on illegal gambling operations in Saratoga Springs, the idyllic resort town in upstate New York. Lansky pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 90 days in prison, a sentence that stemmed from his involvement with the Arrowhead Inn. His associate, Joe Stacker, was also implicated, fined $10,000, and handed a suspended 1-year prison sentence.
Yes, I was sent to prison, but it was only a gambling charge. I could gamble legally in Nevada and Florida, but not in Saratoga. But everybody knew there was gambling up there. The place was full of casinos. I had investments in the Arrowhead Inn and in the Piping Rock Casino, too. I'm sure the reason why the cops in Saratoga suddenly took action was that Governor Dewey ordered an investigation because of the Kefauver report. It was just bad timing.
Lansky's time in prison came with its own peculiar stories. He smiled as he recounted.
I asked the guards to bring me a dictionary and a Bible. I thought I might as well use the time to improve my mind and study the Holy Book. A few days later, I was astonished to see in the newspapers that I'd turned religious and was going to become a Christian. This had something to do with the fact that a priest used to come to visit the other prisoners. I had asked for a rabbi, but no one had come. So the priest came to visit me, maybe because he thought I was lonely. Finally, on the last day of my imprisonment, a rabbi turned up. I said to him, "Rabbi, they've tried to make a Christian out of me. By the time you decided to come to my rescue, I could have been thrown to the lions several times over."
Lansky was released from prison on July 21, 1953. Shortly thereafter, he moved his residence to Florida, closing down his New York apartment. But prison hadn't brought an end to the relentless attention from law enforcement. Over the years, they've tried every way they could to find me guilty of all sorts of offenses. The income tax people were on my back all this time too. The Internal Revenue Service believed they had finally found a way to pin Lansky down. Starting in 1950, Joseph D. Delfino, a special agent, spent 3 years meticulously dissecting Lansky's finances. Tax records from 1944 through 1958 were scrutinized, and investigators discovered a pattern of large cash deposits and withdrawals from Lansky's account at the Manufacturers Trust Bank in New York.
They've got some pretty good brains in the Revenue Service. They've jailed people like Mo Annenberg, Frank Costello, Al Capone, Waxy Gordon, Johnny Torrio, hundreds of people. If I was really guilty, surely they would have got me. What can one man do against all their lawyers and other experts? If I finally wasn't even prosecuted, I have to be innocent, right?
IRS reports weren't so forgiving. Delfino recommended prosecution for tax evasion for the years 1945 and 1947. A stern conclusion stated that Lansky had willfully and deliberately attempted to defeat and evade a large proportion of his income tax liability. Yet, despite the findings, prosecutors could not make a case that would hold up in court. In the end, Lansky paid the additional tax assessments, and the case was marked closed. Lansky's battles didn't end with the IRS. In 1952, the Immigration Bureau attempted to revoke his citizenship, dredging up petty arrests from his youth. Lansky bristled at the memory.
I became an American citizen in September of 1928. It was a very proud moment for me. The ceremony took place in Brooklyn Federal Courthouse, and all my family and friends came. I remember how wonderful I felt when I left that place with the naturalization papers in my hands. Maybe you can imagine how mad I was when the government tried to denaturalize me in 1952. They raked up all my petty arrests before I applied for citizenship, and the next year they pulled Ahern out of prison to tell a pack of lies about my alleged misdeeds when I was a young man. But the attempts to deport me failed again.
Through it all, Lansky remained defiant, a man who had dodged decades of accusations, investigations, and courtroom battles. He'd outmaneuvered law enforcement and prosecutors alike, always emerging with his freedom intact. It wasn't luck, it was Lansky's ability to play the long game, an art he had perfected over a lifetime in the shadows. The proceedings to denaturalize and deport Meyer Lansky were dismissed for lack of prosecution, but Lansky never forgot how close he'd come to disaster. He reflected on one of his many close calls with the law, a memory etched in his mind as vividly as the neon lights of the Broadway marquee.
It's no joke being arrested. I remember going back to New York on February 11th, 1958. The minute I got off the plane, I realized I was being tailed. On Broadway, when I got out of the cab, I was arrested. They cross-examined me for several hours, asking what I knew about the murder of Anastasia, which is why I remember the date. Of course, I knew nothing. So, to save face, they booked me on a vagrancy charge. I was freed on a $1,000 bond.
Lansky remarked, his voice calm but carrying the weight of frustration. Even his supposed allies, like Cuban dictator Batista, couldn't resist poking fun at his misfortunes. Lansky recounted the dictator's theatrical gesture after his New York arrest.
Batista played a little joke on me. He announced publicly that I wouldn't be allowed to return to Havana so long as these serious charges were outstanding against me. Naturally, they were dismissed. And when I returned to Cuba, Batista and I had a good laugh over the whole thing.
Lansky explained, a rare grin flashing across his face. But it wasn't just arrests or courtroom antics that enraged Lansky. It was the government's targeted smears, especially when they dragged his family into the fray. He fumed over a Department of Justice memorandum dated August 24, 1977. The document, originally drawn up in July 1961, scrutinized every detail of Lansky's life, including his daughter Sandra.
Sure, she's divorced, and I was damn sorry about it. But does that make her reputation doubtful? Is it right for them to smear my daughter that way?
Lansky said, his voice brimming with indignation. The FBI's relentless surveillance extended back decades, from bugged meeting spots to whispered suspicions. They investigated Lansky's early ventures, tracing his rise from the Prohibition-era to his command over international gambling empires. One such report described Lansky as not employed at present, but has been in the gambling business, legally and illegally, most of his life. It chronicled his evolution from a Prohibition-era muscleman to the undisputed king of gambling. After Castro's revolution forced Lansky out of Cuba, his gambling empire lay dormant, but the whispers of his influence persisted. Even Lansky's former associates, like Anna Lansky and Jake Harmatz, were questioned. Anna, his first wife, reluctantly admitted Lansky's ties to illicit gambling, but insisted he kept his hands clean. Harmatz, the former owner of Ratner's restaurant, recalled the backroom dealings with Lansky, Siegel, and their crew. The FBI listened intently, noting every word, every rumor. The most damning revelations came from wiretaps placed in Angelo Gyp DiCarlo's clubroom in New Jersey. Over years of surveillance, the FBI amassed a trove of evidence suggesting Lansky's unrivaled dominance in the underworld. "Nobody's got Meyer," DiCarlo was heard saying. "He's like a horse." The agents interpreted this to mean that Lansky operated independently, free from Cosa Nostra's iron grip. More tapes revealed the intricate web Lansky wove in Las Vegas, Miami, and the Bahamas. DiCarlo detailed how Jerry Katina and others funneled millions from Las Vegas casinos to Lansky's operation. "Lansky has more points in Las Vegas casinos than everyone else put together," DiCarlo remarked on one tape. The FBI concluded that Lansky was the key to Italian-Jewish syndicate cooperation. Even Meyer's alleged skimming operations at the Flamingo Hotel, partnering with figures like Sam Cohen, were laid bare. Despite the FBI's relentless efforts, much of the evidence was inadmissible in court, obtained through unauthorized surveillance. But Lansky was fully aware of the government's determination to bring him down.
The FBI was determined to get me, Lansky said with a bitter laugh. They didn't have evidence, so they tried to associate those people with me, claiming that everything they said was true whenever they mentioned my name. They'd made up their minds that I was guilty of just about every crime, and they worked illegally to make what they called facts fit their crazy theories.
The pressure on Lansky was unrelenting. If one charge was dropped, another emerged like clockwork. When his case for illegal possession of barbiturates was dismissed in June 1970, Lansky knew the writing was on the wall.
I decided then that I should leave the United States, Lansky revealed. I was still a citizen, and there were no charges out against me at the moment. But I felt that somehow or other, just like Dewey framed Charlie Luciano on those prostitution charges, something was in the works. That FBI kid had been pretty blunt, and I wouldn't have been surprised at almost any kind of frame-up.
Anxiety gripped him after a chilling incident in Tacoma, where two strange men approached his 12-year-old grandson, Meyer II, calling him by name. The boy fled, but the event rattled Lansky deeply. "When I walk the streets, I never know when I may get it," he confided to an FBI agent. He lamented that he trusted no one, particularly among the Italians. "There are too many nuts running around," he said. Seeking answers, Lansky asked Miami attorney David Rosen to arrange a meeting with FBI agent Jerris Armstrong. Lansky wanted to know if charges or subpoenas awaited him, or if he could leave the country freely. Armstrong confirmed he faced no immediate obstacles. Reflecting on his friend Doc Stacher's escape to Israel years earlier, Lansky decided to follow suit. In July 1970, Lansky, Teddy, and their Shih Tzu, Bruzza, boarded a flight to Tel Aviv. Exile seemed preferable to incarceration, a chance to evade the chaos closing in on him in America. Once a quiet architect of empire, Lansky now retreated under growing pressure, leaving behind a legacy of myth, fear, and suspicion. His calm facade, once unshakable, was now fraying as he sought refuge in the land of his ancestors.